Breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. The new college football AP Top 25 poll is out after a thrilling Week 8, and we have a new #1 team in the nation. Hello, Oregon. Texas's loss to Georgia propelled the Ducks to that top spot, while the Longhorns, now 6-1 on the season, fall to 5. Meanwhile, Georgia, who so desperately needed that win over the Longhorns to make a statement, move up 3 spots and are now your #2 team in the nation. Penn State stays idle, as you see there, followed by Ohio State. Tennessee's win over rival Bama moves them up to 7. LSU at 8. A lot of SEC teams sprinkled in here, despite this being the very first time since 2007 that the SEC has 0 undefeated teams. A look now at 11 through 20. Hey there, BYU. This is not a BYU team to be overlooked if you are not paying attention. This very much could be the Big 12 champion when it's all said and done. Meanwhile, in the Big 10, Indiana now 7-0 on the season, undefeated after a big win over Nebraska. They move up to 13. Now, something to note with Indiana, a key injury to the Hoosier squad. Their quarterback, Curtis Rourke, will miss next week's game against Washington due to an injury to his thumb on his throwing hand. That could have a huge impact to this team as they continue to chase success in the college football playoff. Back to the SEC here. You see Bama has now 2 losses on the season, 1 now to their rival Tennessee, and fall to 15. That's the lowest Bama has ranked since 2010. A look at the rest of the teams that round out the new AP Top 25 poll. You'll notice the #1 team entering this season and the defending champs, the Michigan Wolverines, have dropped completely out of the rankings after their loss to Illinois. Also, you see there, despite both Missouri and SMU both having wins this past weekend, they both fall a few spots in the rankings. And how about Army and Navy? Just rolling for our service academies as they both remain undefeated. We're going to dive all into this as we welcome you to CBS Sports HQ. I'm Jordan Giorgio alongside Bryant McFadden here. I'm just going to start with you and your initial reactions to the latest rankings.
I think they got it right, Jordan.
Okay.
I don't have an issue with Oregon being #1. When you watch their game against Ohio State over a week ago, entertaining game, very, very competitive game. But when you look at Dylan Gabriel, seeing how he was able to take care of his business, looking at their defense, how they slowed things down a little bit for Will Howard, that was a big-time win, maybe the most impressive win that we've watched. And yes, I'm saying that when you talk about what they were going against, arguably the most talented team in all of college football when you look at the roster that the Buckeyes have assembled. In Georgia has the second most impressive win, in my opinion, seeing what they did last night against the Longhorns. It's going to be a very, very entertaining race the rest of the way. Each week we can see some turmoil or some change happen within the top 10. But a few teams I would like to highlight.
Let's do it.
When you talk about national contenders, Penn State, they're playing some really good football. And if you look at their schedule the rest of the way, they will have a matchup against the Buckeyes a few weeks from now. But they're a team that has been kind of under the radar, but yet and still taking care of their business in a convincing way. When you look at Clemson, looking at what Clemson has done since getting dominated week 1 against Georgia, they're playing some pretty good football. And Iowa State, let's give the Big 12 some love. A very, very impressive win last night against UCF. UCF controlled that game for the majority of it. But the last few drives, Iowa State, they showed up. Big-time plays were made. Because of that, they're currently in the top 10.
Yeah, I'm glad that you highlighted a few of these teams, especially Penn State sitting there at 6-0. They stay idle this week at #3. They did not play, had a bye, but it's important to note that they could very well be in that Big 10 National Championship, which, by the way, is on CBS this year, as the Big 10 is the new home, or CBS is the big home of the Big 10 this season. All right, I do want to get into, because you mentioned Georgia and Texas. Let's talk about it, because Texas undefeated, they were rolling. You know, as always, everyone's saying that Texas is back. They were looking promising. Their quarterback play was looking promising. However, many people were chirping, let's pump the brakes a little bit. They haven't played anyone just yet. and then they saw the top dog in the SEC, quite literally, and they found out. What were your takeaways from that game?
I was just overly surprised to see how much more physical Georgia was than Texas, especially in the trenches. Texas offensive line-wise, they came into that ball game as a highly respectable unit. They left that ball game with not the same respect. They were dominated. The quarterbacks, either or, Ewers, Manning, they struggled because they could not get the protection. They couldn't run the football either. I mean, it felt like Georgia was a varsity squad and Texas was a JV squad, something that we did not expect to see. And when Kirby gave his post-game presser and talked about their intent coming into this ball game, they wanted to eat. And they were hungry, and they ate for 4 quarters. This ball game was personal for UGA. They still had that loss in their minds against Alabama, and they came in with this mentality of earning more respect, but also dominating and doing so with how we play the game when you talk about being a bulldog. This is a very, very talented team with a lot of experience, and they're the best coached team when you look at all the elite level squads in college football. And Kirby Smart just put forth his best effort. They were well prepared, they executed, and most importantly, they were physical. That's Georgia football.
Before we move on to the new #1 team in the nation, what was your opinion on Texas going to Arch Manning in that game and that decision?
I felt like it was a bit premature, and here's why. It was more about the protection or the lack thereof. Now, if you're telling me you had concerns about the offensive line rectifying some of their issues and you wanted to go with the more mobile guy that kind of helped the offensive line out, then that makes sense. But if that was the case, you eventually went back to Quinn Ewers, right? So it was, I know Sarkisian said he just wanted to kind of mix up the flow a little bit and give Quinn Ewers an opportunity to kind of see things from a different perspective. But it wasn't about the quarterbacks or their issue. It was about the offensive line. They couldn't run the football. They couldn't protect. So when you look at moving forward, one thing I'll say about playing Georgia, right? And we could see these teams face off again in Atlanta. We don't know, depending on how things shakes out. But if you're going to beat Georgia, Jordan, you need to have a mobile, athletic quarterback. You need to have a quarterback that can throw, but most importantly, he's an athlete. That's why Jalen Milroe and Alabama's offense had so much success against UGA defensively, because they had a guy that could throw the football, but also he could become a +1 in the running game. If you got a generic pocket quarterback against Georgia, good luck in thinking you're going to be successful against that type of defense for 4 quarters.
Yeah, it was a game that I think we had a lot of questions about both teams, and we finally got some answers. Let's go ahead and talk about the new #1 team in the nation, and that is the Oregon Ducks. They do have a huge game in the Big Ten next week. That game on CBS against Illinois. They're your #1 team right now, BMAC, but are you confident that this Oregon team will end this season as the top team?
I'm not confident. I think I would have to take the field right now, and here's why. Ohio State, the team we saw against Ohio State, was a team that we thought we would see the entire season. But remember, if you look at how they got things going with Oregon, they had some struggles against teams they should have dominated against. Now, can they sustain the level of play that we saw against Ohio State, or will they have an emotional roller coaster when it comes to production and consistency? This week, this is a very, very intriguing ball game for Oregon. You talk about Illinois. This is a team they're playing with a lot of confidence. They have good quarterback play. They're running the football well. I love Pat Bryant at the wide receiver position as well. They have some dudes that can play football, and this is a different Illinois team when you talk about expectations. This is a team that believes they can win. In years past, Illinois was a team that was hoping they can win. They actually believe they can win, and this is a very, very intriguing game, like I said, for Oregon to continue to show how elite they are, and for a team like Illinois that's trying to get into that national contender conversation, most importantly, the Big Ten championship conversation. This would be a huge win for Illinois if they're able to pull it off.
All right, we got to get into what happened on the 3rd Saturday in October at Neyland Stadium. Tennessee defeats their rival, the Alabama Crimson Tide. You know, we talked about this on our pregame show yesterday here on CBS Sports HQ every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. You know, we talked about, could a 3-loss SEC team make the college football playoff? Now, I'm not talking about Mississippi State. I'm talking about the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Texases of the world. With Bama now 5-2 on the season, and let's take into consideration the quality of losses, are they still have a chance at this college football playoff, or are they completely out in your opinion?
I think the only way they have a legit chance when it comes to the playoffs, Jordan, is if they make it to Atlanta to play in the SEC championship game.
Okay.
Right? I think that has to be a necessity for them to have a legit shot to get into the tournament. And here's why. You look at what's going on collectively in the SEC. In conference play, you have two teams that are undefeated in SEC play. Those two teams, they're Texas A&M and LSU. Everyone else has at least one loss in conference play. Alabama, they currently have 2 losses in conference play, losing to Vandy and losing to Tennessee, in which we witnessed yesterday evening. So they have no room for error. There you have it, the SEC standings. I talked about Texas A&M, LSU. Remember, they will play each other, if I'm not mistaken, towards the latter part of the season. LSU still has an intriguing game against Alabama in Death Valley. So the room for error is at a bare minimum for Alabama, to say the least, to have a legit shot to get to the SEC championship game. And all of those teams that you just saw in your graphic, they're all in front of Alabama. So Alabama, not only do they need to take care of their business, they also got to window watch. They got to look outside their window to see exactly what is going on in their neighborhood, because they will need help. And needing help in the game of football when it comes to playoffs is never a good spot to be in.
All right, I do want to talk about Tennessee as we put a bow on this discussion here. Huge win for Tennessee, huge win for Josh Heupel in particular. I love to see where he's taking this program. What is his ceiling and this Vols team ceiling?
For Tennessee, they got to be better, I think, when you're playing against good teams. When they play against teams they're better than, they dominate. But the sign of a really, really good team, they show the same production regardless of the team they're playing against. Now for Tennessee, also, Jordan, they control their own destiny, because they will have a meet and greet against UGA.
Yeah.
Right?
Well.
And that will be a heck of a meet and greet for you to really state your claim, not just within the SEC, but in college football as a whole. So it was an ugly game yesterday. And what we witnessed when we watched Tennessee and Alabama, Jordan, I think it's safe to say we watched 2 teams that are not as good as we thought they were.
Most definitely.
Right? That's why you saw such sloppy play. You saw such inconsistent play. Oddly enough, well, fortunate enough for Tennessee, Alabama just didn't want to win the ball game.
Yeah.
And Tennessee made the 1 or 2 plays they needed to make to be able to win the ball game. But moving forward, they got to get better, because when Georgia lost to Alabama weeks ago, that opened their eyes. The sense of urgency is there. They're hungry, and they see the window of opportunity. So for Tennessee, when you play, that's the next big game on their schedule coming up against UGA. That's an opportunity to state your claim, but you don't want to overlook any other opponent before you get to that moment. But I'm just highlighting the most notable game coming forward.
They definitely need to take advantage of that. Well, they did enough last night to move them up to 7 in the latest top 25 AP poll rankings, as we show you a look again at 1 through 10. Texas's loss to Georgia propelled the Oregon Ducks to that top spot, as you see there, while the Longhorns, now 6-1 on the season, fall to 5. Meanwhile, Georgia, they needed that win over the Longhorns to really make a statement. They move up 3 spots. Now your number 2 team in the entire nation. Penn State stays idle, followed by Ohio State. And as I mentioned, Tennessee now 7, followed by LSU at 8. A lot of SEC teams, as I mentioned earlier, sprinkled in here, despite being, for the first time since 2007, the SEC 0 undefeated teams. All right, we have some breaking news here. Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson was carted off the field with an apparent leg injury. We will update you as soon as we find out more information, so keep it locked in here on CBS Sports HQ. Much more from us when we return. We are taking a look at all that Week 9 of the college football season brings us. It's a big week in the SEC with some huge games between LSU and Texas A&M, also Missouri and Bama. We'll break it all down for you next.